Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, this wasn't necessarily scheduled today. I have with me journalist, the indomitable Michael Tracey. I asked him if he could willing to come on, and he was nice enough to say yes. He said yes. Michael Tracey, please say hi to the audience.
I did say yes, and I also say hi to the audience.
Very cool. I'm glad that you took me up on this because I wanted a reporter to talk to about this because, I followed this case. I followed the Wikileaks stuff pretty closely, but the stuff with Roger Stone, there's been so many ins and outs with in regards to Roger Stone. It's just been somewhat of a cluster in order to follow the stuff that he's been saying and keep track of what's true and what's not. Before I start, just to give people a heads up on what's taking place, Roger Stone has been indicted. And they arrived in this kind of like military gear in order to go get Roger Stone. He's $250,000 where he's pulled himself off bond. And he came out and he gave this defiant gesture. It was, again, it's hard to know what's Roger Stone's being truthful or not. He comes out and gives this statement, present to everyone. It's only like a minute long. It's not long. That's pretty epic. There is no situation in which I will bear false witness, almost using religious imagery in making this argument.
Yeah, the defiant gesture that he did on the steps of the courthouse was the famous Nixon
thing,
gesture before he got onto the helicopter after resigning. So that's all, that's part of Roger Stone's mystique that he's crafted for himself, in which actually a lot of the media has helped to build up over the years. Roger Stone is a master manipulator. And, the way that I've been talking about it is not just that he's a manipulator, but he's a consummate bullshitter. He's probably one of the most successful bullshitters in American political history, which is really saying a lot, right? My favorite example is he actually helped orchestrate Al Sharpton's 2004 presidential campaign. People forget that even happened. But Roger Stone, in his New York political circles, helped organize Al Sharpton's presidential campaign. And it didn't come out until later on afterwards. Wayne Barrett, the legendary Village Voice reporter, broke the story open at the time. And I actually spoke to both Roger Stone and Al Sharpton about their relationship during the 2016 campaign, just to kind of shed more light on what his broader political angle is, which is basically like a combination of trolling, cynicism, self-promotion. So during this period in 2016 that are now the subjects of this indictment, meaning he's accused of making false statements before Congress that pertain to communications he had during this period in summer of 2016. Stone was on this whirlwind publicity tour because he had this short-lived formal association with Trump on the presidential campaign, for a couple months after Trump announced. Then Stone was either fired or he left. It's never quite clear exactly what happened there, but and then it was always just assumed that Stone had continuing interactions with Trump and was giving him advice and whatnot. So during this period of summer 2016, WikiLeaks, as I'm sure everybody remembers, was dangling this idea that they had damning materials on Hillary Clinton. Initially, you remember that they released the DNC emails during the Democratic convention, and then there was a lot of speculation about what more they had about Hillary. So Roger Stone was basically what seemed like trying to investigate what WikiLeaks had. So he was seeking to make contact with Assange and WikiLeaks so he could ascertain what was forthcoming. And because he was a pro-Trump operative, that seemed to make sense. And because he's such a master bullshitter, he correctly inferred that this would be a good opportunity for him to continue puffing himself up and promoting himself. So he was selling a book at the time, doing tons of interviews, and so forth. So he went around saying, he had a back channel with Assange, and the back channel supposedly was this radio host Randy Credico, who I actually remember.
Oh God!
Initially from Occupy Wall Street, believe it or not, 2011. Randy Credico was one of these kind of gadfly figures from New York City who had congregated Occupy Wall Street and was just kind of not somebody who you would ever remotely expect to be in any way integral to a national political scandal.
Yeah.
But
he mentioned Credico said this is BS, or he said that Stone is a bullshitter. He's just
right, and
bullshitter.
And Credico's denial of this seems to have been borne out if you go by what is contained in the Mueller indictment. So, for one thing, Credico started publicly rejecting Stone's characterization, well before this indictment came out.
Yeah.
At which point Stone, started threatening him, was sending him profane emails. At one point, threatened Credico's dog. So, kind of just gangsterish tactics that, they almost seem silly because he's putting it all in writing. Which while he knows he's under criminal investigation, so the guy's kind of a moron. I mean, he's intelligent in one way in that he knows how to manipulate the press and create this kind of outsized
on himself,
platform for himself. But on the other hand, he's like a moron. So why would you put that in writing? That's witness tampering potentially, and he knows that he's under investigation. So it's just kind of confounding.
Well, that's the wild part, though. I mean, WikiLeaks has said this is bogus and said they didn't have any back channels with Stone, and the indictment itself is not really saying that either. I mean, all of this was supposedly Trump and Russia, but this has nothing really to do with Trump and Russia, right? This is him lying to Congress.
Yeah, I mean, all the charges here are incidental or procedural in some way. So they don't pertain to the core allegation of an illegal conspiracy between Trump or people affiliated with Trump and Russia. It's just that the moron Roger Stone wasn't forthcoming before Congress when he was under oath to the point that now he can be charged with lying. And, if you look at the examples of lies that are in the indictment, it does seem very likely that he did actually lie. So, I mean, there's really difficult to get around that one for him. And I think, if things proceed as they seem like they're going to, he probably will go to prison for some time.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think anybody, I don't shed a tear for him.
Yeah.
I shed a tear more for people who are extrapolating wildly from this that some grander conspiracy theory has been proven, because it just simply has not. I mean, none of these charges, again, pertain to the underlying theory having to do with Trump and Russia, but it gets lost in the noise to the point where people can't differentiate between the, mountains of different information and like strands of this story, because they all kind of congeal into this one Trump-Russia thing that, journalists can't even keep track of, much less ordinary citizens.
Well, I think part of the problem is all of it is based on this kind of endpoint. The endpoint is already kind of determined. So they're not looking at this from this kind of just objective, journalistic, I'm impartial, etc. They already have a certain focal point of Trump and Russia, and there was something going on here. And so anything that takes place is filtered within the context of Trump and Russia. So Stone has to be a link to WikiLeaks, even if he's a BSer. He's a BSer, but he's a BSer that has some kind of tether to WikiLeaks. Like, it's that type of stuff. Well, it's like when you're reading the articles about it, like the New York Times piece on it makes certain assumptions that the Russia thing was right, meaning Trump colluded with Russia, or Russia tried to hack the election. And this indictment somehow shows a connection between WikiLeaks and Roger Stone. They spelled this out for stuff that I don't necessarily think they can absolutely know as a flat fact, but they're presenting it as if it's a flat fact. It's like
that's what I was going to say when you introduced me as you wanted to speak to a reporter on this. I was almost going to say, reporters are in some way the worst people to speak on this because they've been the primary generators of the exaggerated version of what this story entails. So, because they're as locked into the narrative as anybody. A lot of them have staked their personal and professional reputations on it. So
the last 2 years.
Yeah. And there's like a tiny, vanishingly tiny a minority of people who are reporters but have a different perspective. And, we get maligned constantly and, ostracized. Not that I'm complaining, it's fine. But that just tells you why seeking out a reporter isn't always necessarily the best course. It, very much depends on which reporters you're talking
to.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, just in very basic terms, for anybody who's coming to the story and they want to understand what's going on with Roger Stone, can you give a brief synopsis of just the basics of the charge and the basics of the connection between Roger Stone, WikiLeaks, if it existed at all? And is this what they're telling me it is, where they essentially have a slam dunk with Donald Trump going to prison for collusion with Russia? I'm joking on this part, but just the basics of what is Roger Stone in general? He's like a political operative, right?
Yeah, he's a political operative who is kind of, parlayed that into this media career where he writes books, he gives speeches, he has columns, and it's a lucrative enterprise for him. Even his most recent endeavor is now he's like the correspondent for InfoWars or whatever. So it was hilarious because the first phone call that he made either in custody or just like after getting out of custody was to Alex Jones, which is like, you're in deep trouble when that's your first phone call you make, But anyway, what the connection is, I mean, try to bring your mind back to summer 2016. There were endless journalists, operatives, ordinary citizens who were trying to figure out what WikiLeaks and Assange had, right?
Yeah.
So Roger Stone would have been far from alone in that. He would have also been far from alone in like making wild speculations about what they had, because other people did the same thing. It's just that he was then questioned about his statements under oath, and they seem to contradict other statements that he made in text and email. And he's kind of a harried individual. Yeah. So whether his lies were intentional or just by omission, doesn't even exactly matter at this point. I mean, maybe that'll be one defense that's used.
Yeah.
If it goes to trial, actually Jerome Corsi, this other conspiracy theorist guy who had said that he was going to be indicted and hasn't been yet, and may not be.
Well, Corsi said that the guy, one of the people that were named in the indictments, I think it's like person number one, Corsi said that was him.
Right.
So, it's like whether or not something else falls through. But
a few months ago, Corsi said that he was going to be indicted, and the defense that he gave for why he was innocent was that he had innocently forgotten emails that Mueller's staff had questioned him about under oath.
No,
and so it wasn't a material or intentional lie on his part. And Stone could come up with some variation of that defense should this go to trial. But I think he's going to have a difficult time doing that, given the evidence that's laid out in the indictment.
Well, not to mention, he's been talking about this for the past 2 years, and it has been a camera that he hasn't gotten in front of and said something about.
Yeah.
And like you said, it seems to be contradictory. And sometimes he says, yes, I'm a connector, or I'm in between. And then other times he says, I have no connection. So just as a last question, what do you think is going to happen with this? Do you think I guess you've kind of answered this. Like you said, you think he's probably going to go to jail. I mean, ultimately, he lied to the Congress. I guess it's important to note, though, that he didn't get caught for lying to Mueller.
No, he didn't.
Unless I'm misunderstanding this. He got caught.
No, that's right. He didn't get caught for lying to Mueller. The prediction game is so played out at this point because who can ever.
And there's something else that's important here that you mentioned. They're trying to say that he had some connection to WikiLeaks, but like you said, everybody was guessing on that stuff, on what they had on Hillary Clinton. This wasn't necessarily something where he might have had a conduit to it. They haven't necessarily created the link between him and WikiLeaks in as much as between anybody in WikiLeaks was essentially just guessing and saying, you know, I'm a pipeline.
And the indictment doesn't even purport to establish that Stone had any privileged access to WikiLeaks or had any kind of tangible, quote, back channel. It just establishes that he claimed he had a back channel. And then that was contradicted by other information, including Credico, who, you know, supposedly was the back channel. So
the back channel says I'm not the back channel.
Yeah, so it's like kind of a lousy back channel if it doesn't actually result in you getting unique insight into what WikiLeaks has or is going to do.
And you know the important part to that, if Credico is lying on that, Credico is going to jail. Like, meaning if Credico comes out and says, look, I wasn't his back channel, and then you establish that he was a back channel, he's going to jail. He has no.
Or if he told Mueller that and it turns out to be true, then
that's kind of a point.
And there's as far as I know, there's little indication that that's going to happen, meaning that Credico is going to be charged for anything.
Yeah, it's most likely than not Credico was telling the truth.
And the other thing is a lot of the way this twisted that's so irritating is Assange made a lot of public statements saying we have stuff on Hillary Clinton. It wasn't as if you had to have any special position to know that. You had to just follow their Twitter feed. And that just gets lost in this frenzy. It's so amazing.
I'm fascinated by this because it feels like you're in a daze. Like, it's like something comes up, says Trump and Russia, but like, okay. And then like 2 years later, it's propagating into one false story that has to be retracted after the next, where the intelligence services tried to create a link between Manafort and Assange, which again, no evidence to back up. They just run with the story, and other people run with the story. Another story, Cohen was told by Trump to lie to Congress, which would have been impeached. Like, that's literally impeachable behavior. Mueller has to come out and say, yeah, that's not true either. You have one story after the next, all cut through the lens of Trump has done something with Russia in order to get Hillary Clinton a loss, in which case we just need to find the evidence to back it up. But the assumption is that the evidence exists. Like,
we could try to spend literally all day naming, going through all these journalistic failures, and we wouldn't, we wouldn't make it through the day. I mean, we'd have to have like a full week. There's just so many, and it's so tedious. And this Roger Stone thing is just one narrow part of it. But more generally speaking, yeah, I mean, if your reflexive instinct at this point is not to be supremely skeptical of every Trump-Russia revelation, whether it's coming from a journalistic outlet or from a law enforcement outlet, then I don't know where you've been for the past 2.5 years, because you kind of have to get a grip.
Agreed. I have one super chat. Stephanie Chateau, Stone indictment is justice for puppets everywhere. Still don't trust Mueller because he's tried to frame Julian before, but Stone totally deserves this. I think you said something like that too, Michael. You was like, yeah, so I'm not going to weep for Stone on this. He's kind of got what he deserved.
No, I mean, his entire career was predicated on bullshit. He continued his bullshitting in 2016, and he bullshitted it in front of Congress, and then here now this is what he's going to have to deal with. So it's kind of a logical endpoint for him.
All right, Michael, thank you very much, man. Journalist Michael Tracey, again, coming off a short notice, and I totally appreciate this. Very, very cool. Thank you.
Sure thing.
All right, guys, I am going to end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone. And we are...